So what are the key things we need to note when we're responding to a request for proposals? Request for proposals. So number one is where to find requests for proposals, right? In the last brown bag, we mentioned some community of practice which you can join. So I mean, if you can still, I encourage us to go back to our videos if you cannot remember our YouTube channel where we normally post all our videos. You'll find you're going to find one of the videos where you have where to find requests for proposals or community of practice that are suitable for you that you can join. And from there you can, so it's a two-way thing. It's either you are in a community of practice where they're sending requests for proposals, so I can only remember Eval Youth. It's a very popular, huge community of practice. They said so it used to be Peregrine Group, but now it is now hosted. The community is hosted by Eval. I've forgotten the suffix now. We mentioned it in the last brown bag anyways. So it's either you're waiting for all those emails or you're searching for it. So some organizations search for requests for proposals via several platforms. So it might be USAID platforms, procurement platforms. It might be FCDO procurement platform. It might be, yes, some of the bilateral agencies. I mean, a handful of them that sends out request proposals, especially in the context of evaluation, as a procurement platform where this is being churned out. The World Bank, as a multilateral, as zone. Maybe one of these days we can also share that list. But I think there's a spreadsheet which loans hours are provided for such. But I'm not sure if I can find it. But if I can find it before we finish, I'd show us that. So 16 is what I want to pivot on. One is let me quickly state that responding to a request for proposal means you want to focus on that skill of writing proposals, right? And most times you might not see this as the phases of an evaluation. There's a video on our YouTube channel, which has phases of an evaluation. You can also check the YouTube channel. And that starts from contracting. But there's some things that have happened before contracting phase, which, yes, evaluators pay attention to. Because, yes, there's how the work you're doing currently came by. So there's a business development section of firms, consulting firms, bilateral agencies, multilateral agencies that develop proposals. So, and people develop their skills or rebuild their skills on writing proposals. So, so it's a very important aspect of evaluation that most evaluators might not know, or somebody who is doing enumeration or a data analyst, or, I mean, whatever hierarchy you belong to, but this is an important part because this is what brings the work, right? So the first key thing is, if you want to know how to write proposals, then you need to know how to read requests for proposals. At least read 4 requests for proposals in a week. Very, very important. Read 4 requests for proposals in a week. I learned this from some of my mentors who are also proposal writers. At times we call them technical writers also. So you need to be able to read RFPs. Just, I mean, read what any RFP that comes to you, try and get to read it. And normally we read and reread it, like read several times so that you don't miss any part of it. Because you know what? Proposals, requests for proposals can come in small sizes, and I'm going to show us some RFPs now. Let me see if I can stop sharing this and share something else. So I'm going to share with us some proposals in a bit. Good. So let me come back and try and share my screen. I hope I don't miss it. Share. Good. So a proposal can, this is just a request proposal can be as small as 3 pages, right? So this is just like a 3-page request for proposal, 3 pages. So this 3 pages also, I mean, it doesn't mean you have to also read and reread it. So it can be as a request proposal can be as small as 3 pages, and I'm going to show us another kind of another type. Let me see again. So let me stop share and reshare, because I think so you could good. So I'm not sure if you're seeing what I'm seeing anyways, so let me come back to it and see. I think I'm sharing the same thing. But can you see a difference? Can anyone tell me if they're seeing USAID Nigeria?
Yes, we're seeing it.
Yes, you can.
Yes, I can see it.
Yes,
Good.
USAID Nigeria. Yes.
USAID. So you can see it.
Yes, I can see it too.
Good, great. So this is like 148
yes, I can
pages
see it.
Of a request for proposal. So you can have it, and I mean, this has a huge part in it that you need to just figure out, and so but I'll tell us something about reading and rereading this. At first, most technical writers will not read everything. So because it's 148 pages, at first you might not want to read everything, but there's some specific things you need to go into, and not the introduction and all that, especially if it is like this 148 pages. And it is because of the reason that a technical writer will not quickly read all the 148 pages, but it will quickly focus on some things inside the 148 pages. So that's another type of a request for proposal. And I mean, USAID, they call it solicitation. So what I just showed you is actually a solicitation, and they call this particular one request for, at times they call, so USAID has 2 types. So there's the request for assistance, and there's the request for proposal. There's also the request for quotations, I guess, and some other kind of request that USAID does. This is the same thing with also FCDO. So that's the Commonwealth Development Organization. I've forgotten now, but that is the new DFID that you know. So they also have this, we call all these things volumes, right? So I also have something that looks like that also. They always come in volumes. So so yes, this is an example of an FCDO kind of terms of reference. So it can be used as terms of reference, but this is, if you can see this is volume 3. So it can come in volumes, like 7 different volumes. And as a technical writer, you will still end up going through all of them. So, but I mean, for our level, for someone who hasn't written, I mean, these are high level, high-end kind of requesting. These are high level, high-end kind of requests. Somebody needs to mute because I'm hearing. Somebody needs to mute because I'm hearing. Let me see who I can mute. So please mute. Okay. So I mean, you just need to read all the time, but I mean, you can focus on the smaller ones. These are huge ones, like the 3-page request for proposals that I talked about. That is one key thing to actually note, that you need to read and reread. The second point that I want to make is that the first thing the technical writer looks at when he comes across an RFP is the deadline. When is the deadline for submission? So some organizations have they have a timeline for when they can respond to a request for proposal. I think House does like maybe 17 days. So which means that the business development team must get the RFP, must get to know about it 17 days before the submission. Some organizations are like 3 weeks before the submission. So the first thing a technical writer, someone like me, if I see an RFP, the first thing I go to is the deadline for submission. So like, what is the deadline for submission? So that because it's going to take your time. So you need to think about what time do you have? So like, if the deadline for submission is tomorrow, that is super late. If it is 1 week to submission, it's super late. So the deadline for submission is something a technical writer or somebody that responds to proposals would want to look at. And I mean, depending on your bandwidth of work that you have, workload, I mean, some people respond like 2 days to the proposal, but I mean, that is why you need to look at the deadline for submission. Like, does this necessarily meet? So I showed us that small 3-page proposal, and I'm going to go back there. So since, but I mean, not to say that you wouldn't have encountered some other kind of proposal also. So, but I mean, I'm just using that as an example. So this one says submission deadline 31st of March. So I mean, there's no RFP that would not have a submission deadline. The second thing is the skills required. So if you're still seeing this same proposal that I'm sharing, this small one, you can see requirements for application. Once you see the deadline, the next thing is to go to, okay, the requirement, do I meet? So the reason for doing that is, do I meet the requirement, or do we as an organization meet the requirement? So are they looking for a health specialist, which you might not have in your organization? The reason why we look for the skills is to quickly look at, yes, your team, your organization, your friends, your partners, your colleagues. Would you know that do you have those skills? Can you easily reach out? So that is why this skills required is very important, that we quickly use it to know. So to know who is within the team that you can use as part of the team member. The IRA, who is part of the business development team, also wants to know if they quickly need to hire people, if they need to hire some other people whose skills are not within your reach. So the skills required is very important, because you also need to note that the person sending out the request for proposal, if he's asking for a day-old chick, you need to give the person a day-old chick. So you cannot go and give the person a 10-year-old chick or something that is not a chick at all. So because they also know what they're looking for, they have an idea, maybe not necessarily they have an idea of what they're looking for. So you must try as much as possible to meet that requirement of the skills that they say that is needed. So you see some RFPs, they will tell you, okay, these are the teams that they need. Okay, the team leader must be somebody who has 10 years experience in agricultural extension and all. It means you need to find that person. It means that person needs to be in your team before you can respond to that proposal. And if you look at the USAID, FCDO proposals, it is the major reason why those kind of proposals end up as a consortium. So because some organizations might not have that skill, so they need to reach out to other partner organizations and say, oh, can we submit a proposal based on this together? So it's something to look out for, which is the skills required, very, very important. These two things that I just mentioned, the deadline and the skills required, they are very, very important. The third thing that I will say is the scope of the work that needs to be done, even before the approach that is needed to be used. I think the scope comes, so deadline, skills required, the scope of the work. In the scope, most times we look at the geography, the location of where the evaluation is supposed to take place. For example, if where are the beneficiaries? Oh, are they in River State, Katsina? Is it going to be a multi-country evaluation in Somalia, Mali, Rwanda? So I mean, could be in 7 countries. So that is one part of the scope of the evaluation that you might want to think about quickly. That does your team can your team cover all those places? So that's why the scope is very, very important. Or do you have people in those places that you can bring as part of your team? So these are like some of the things we look at in scope. And I mean, in the scope, you also get to know if you're going to be doing a desk review, if they want you to do a desk review, if it's going to be a mixed methodology, you're going to administer questionnaire, you're going to do a qualitative interview. In almost all evaluation RFPs, it is always stated, but I mean, as part of the methodology anyways. So you need the scope is very, very important, and is the third thing. The fourth thing is the approach, which might be, so what type of evaluation are we talking about? So I'm going to show us a request for proposal. Let me see. All right. So let me see if I can get it. No, not this. Let me check again. Okay. So, can anyone tell me if they have seen developmental evaluation? Or I need to reshare it?
I think you might need to reshare. I can't see anything apart from the
Okay,
requirement
let me
for
stop
application.
share.
I think you might need to reshare. I can't
You
see
need to
anything
reshare.
apart from the
Okay,
requirement
let
for
me stop
application.
share. So I'm resharing it. Okay. Oh, can you see it now? Sharing it.
Yes, we
Okay,
can
you
see
see
it.
it now?
Yes, we can see it. It's
Good.
coming up. Yes, we can see it.
Yes, I can see
Yes,
it
we can
now.
see it. It's
Good.
coming up.
So
Yes, I can see
this
it now.
particular RFP
I
says
can
that
see.
it's a development evaluation. And you can see evaluation methodology is a developmental evaluation. So you would, especially if you have if the person that put together the RFP is an experienced person, they will normally put the approach. We've done approaches to evaluation in one of our brown bags. So this is where things play out. Like different commissioners, when I say commissioners, people that send out RFPs that want people to evaluate some of their programs. So these are bilateral, multilateral, international NGOs, local NGOs. So they normally write the approach. So you can see theory-based evaluation. Some people can say, oh, they are looking at a theory-based approach. Some people can say, oh, they're looking at an utilized focused evaluation. So I think this part is specific to evaluation requests for proposals. Like you need to know the approach that the person requesting for the proposal is looking out for. So this is a developmental evaluation. It means that the way you will write a theory-based approach evaluation, like respond to the proposal, like your methodology for approaching it is going to be totally different from developmental evaluation, because developmental evaluation, you're going to be collecting data as the project goes on. So it's not like you wait till the end. So it's not an ex-post evaluation or a theory-based that is like at the end. So developmental evaluation, you need to be collecting data. It could be quarterly, it could be monthly, depending on the resources they have. So the approach is very important, especially if you're looking at an RFP of an experienced organization that is working in the evaluation space. We also use this to know commissioners that are quite experienced in evaluation, because they will state the kind of approach they are looking out for. So I think that is the fifth thing. The sixth thing is that in an RFP, there is always so this is related to the deadline, and that is why most people look at the timeline first. It's important you ask questions. So in an RFP, they might say that it might be in the email and not in the full RFP. It might just be in the email that, see, we have this time space for you to send in your questions before you complete your RFP or send in your RFP, before you send in your proposal, rather. So if that is the case, then you should try as much as possible to send in questions of some things that might not necessarily be clear. Yes, RFPs, there are some RFPs that are not. In fact, the USAID RFP that I mentioned to you, that I showed you, or even the FCDO one, they have a huge timeline gap for answering questions because some RFPs are not clear about the scope. So they want you to assume. They want you to assume like the number of beneficiaries that needs to be interviewed. So, and I mean, then you need to ask some other questions before you know that, like, okay, where are the beneficiaries? What's their expectation? And all. So, and in some cases, people request that, can you give 1 week or 2 weeks more for people to respond to the request for proposal, especially if they're like proposals that are huge, that needs time to recruit people that meet the skills that is required in the proposal. So people ask that question, like, do you foresee that you would extend the time for submission because of XYZ? You can have, some might not necessarily have a comprehensive scope. Some things might be missing. They might say they want a key informant interview, but you don't necessarily know who the key stakeholders are. It wasn't mentioned in the RF, in the request for proposal. So it then makes you to ask questions, like look for where to ask questions. So I think I've seen value in asking questions, because in that you get to know more about what is it supposed to be in the request for proposal. Some commissioners will publish all the questions they got and send it back to everyone. Like, these are the questions that people asked within this period of time. And I mean, they would have closed asking of questions at that time. So, so you should take the opportunity to ask questions. So I have mentioned, so I'll just try and recap before we get into questions. So read. I mean, all through the process of submitting a proposal. For big organizations, there's a team, and I've said it. Yes, consulting firms, they have the business development team. So you can have the technical. So there's one thing I didn't add here, which you need to, it just occurred to me: budgets. So you can add it as 7, actually. Budget is pretty important, so you can know the size of what you're even applying for. I don't know why this quickly skipped me, but budget is also very important. You need to know, yes, what is the size of the work you're supposed to do, and start calculating. So the business development team will always read and reread. For the USAID, FCDO, they have a volume alone on budgeting alone. So there's a proposal for budgeting alone. So budget itself is another topic on its own, where you have the cost preparer. We used to call them cost preparer, that prepares those volumes for the budgets for all those big RFPs. So when read, you need to continue to read. The RFP is very important. You need to quickly read through. Deadline is super important, to know when is the latest time for submission, date for submission. It will be bad if you had used all your time to write a proposal, and the deadline was yesterday, but you're still trying to meet up with deadline today. Try and look at the skills that is required. Very, very important. So that you can talk about if you meet the skills so that you can decide, do you meet the skills required? Do you want to hire? So these are things that organizations quickly use to decide. The approach that needs to be used, very important for evaluation. The scope, yes, the scope, you need to know the size, geographical area, the demographic setting of where this will happen. Then ask questions if they've opened the time. Some will not give a time to ask questions, but if that is the case, still ask questions if you have questions. If they didn't put that, oh, you can ask questions at the XYZ, ask questions. Budgets is the 7th thing. You need to look at the cost that the commissioner is ready to give out on top of that proposal. So if you ask me, if I put this in the top 3 things or the top 4 things, I'll take deadline, skills required, budgets, and the scope. So on that note, I'll pause